Well, here I am at the venue for the next gathering in the Four Seasons journey, which is the full moon gathering. So it's a full moon weekend, and it's also the Southern Hemisphere Samhain or Halloween, and a Scorpio full moon, so lots of action. And I'm setting up my tent and getting ready. There's been lots of preparation for this gathering. The focus is on our animal ally as medicine for our sacred wound, which is childhood trauma that we've experienced. And the weekend is focused on using the medicine of our animal ally to help heal our childhood trauma. And the preparation I've done has been on a part of my childhood trauma that I haven't done this work on before. And so far, with the preparation alone, I have had amazing healing already. So here we go. We've arrived, we're having lunch, coming into the beautiful womb of a circle soon. Here's my place. Here's my new drum that I made. Here we go. It's a full moon very soon in the wee hours of the morning. Fortunately, the rain has stopped. The ground is very soggy, but we're off to bed now. And then tomorrow, so much to do, working together, healing our childhood wounds, and our animal allies there to help us. Sweet dreams. Going in for the day now. And today we will be making masks of our animal allies. And also it's the portal of Samhain or Halloween here in the Southern Hemisphere. And there's an altar set up where we can connect with our ancestors or our dearly departed people. Just seeing women getting up. And this particular weekend has a big memory for me. 11 years ago, I travelled over to France for the UK and France Four Seasons journey in 2015. And this time, 11 years ago, I went over to France to do the full moon gathering on their Beltane, leaving Samhain Halloween here. And my mother died whilst I was away. I kind of knew she was going to, as you do when it's coming to the end of long lives. So I will visit the Samhain portal today, connect with my dead mother and father and remember them in my heart, especially as today is all about childhood trauma and our sacred wound. Well, I've made my mask. And as is the way with sacred craft, there's so many layers to it. And when we make anything, our birth imprint shows up. So bringing consciousness to all the layers is part of the opportunity. And in keeping with the current teaching that's so prevalent in my life right now about keeping things simple, that's been showing up in my mask making. So here she is, my eagle mask. And tonight we each wear our masks and call on our animals and dance them around a fire, weather permitting, or inside if not, and feel the medicine of our animal allies. And before that, what's coming next is a big, deep dive into our actual sacred wound, the childhood trauma that we experienced. It's a great process. That's what's coming next. Morning time, raining in the lychee forest here in the camping area. Well, we had a very late night, and now this morning we gather in circle and debrief the dance last night. So we did get to dance outside. The full moon shone in the sky, no rain. We danced around the fire. It was magnificent. So the sacred wound that I focused on, and when I say sacred, this is the process. We render whatever trauma, wound sacred by asking, how does this serve? What did this teach me about the way of things and my own self? And what is the goal, the gift of this wound? Because without it, I wouldn't be where I am. So rendering something sacred is to ask, how does this serve? Now, the childhood trauma that I chose to focus on for this full moon gathering was the way I was mothered. So I was born in 1958, and I was mothered by an expert. My mum was a fully trained mothercraft nurse in the 1950s. So she came at mothering me confident, competent, really wanting to have a baby and so excited about being a mother. But the practices of 1950 mothercraft, such a lesson in how things change. So the trauma for me was that basically my needs weren't met. I felt abandoned, betrayed. I was raised in a playpen. I was fed on a regime. I was left to cry, all the things. And given in what was called gripe water, which is basically alcohol and dill every night. So, and look, I'm not alone. There are so many of us like this. And also, my mother smoked during the pregnancy of me, which again, for my generation, is really common. This is the time when there were doctors, photographs of doctors in magazines or newspapers smoking Marlboro, saying, smoking is good for your health. So, another lesson in how medicine's perspectives change over time. Good for us to pay attention to. So the beauty of this process for me was that in writing the fairy tale, which is to rewrite the story with a good ending, without even intending to, the process took me through a forgiving process where I actually forgave my mother. And I was not intending to be honest. I was feeling so saddened by the way I was mothered and aware that the experience of being mothered that way, which I wouldn't have known if she hadn't told me about, of course, but what it taught me, the gold, was that I knew what not to do with my children. And also it taught me to endure. It taught me to withstand discomfort, pain, my needs not being met, which set me up for my life, really, for all the things that were to come. But the big piece was forgiving my mother, which feels good, very good. And I'm home now, safe and sound. So it was a huge weekend. Another big thing that happened was one of my teachers from 35 years ago died a couple of weeks before the full moon gathering, and he was my teacher in the shamanic arts, James Harvey Black Bear. He died suddenly, so that was really sad. And the interesting thing about connecting that with the full moon gathering is that James gave me an eagle feather 35 years ago, which is a thing for a shaman to give a student an eagle feather. And here, 35 years later, I have the animal ally eagle. So that felt pretty cool. And then the other big full circle was that 11 years since my mother's death. So on the 11th anniversary of my mother's death, in the full moon gathering at the Byron Bay Four Seasons journey, in the similar portal of full moon and Samhain or Halloween, 11 years later, I forgave my mother. That feels huge. So I want to leave you with my story, my fairy tale, the rewrite of my sacred wound. Ready? Once upon a time, in a forest far, far away, a witchling was born. She was born into a long line of witches who had been thwarted by the ways of men. The witches were under an enchantment that had them thinking that their ways were strange, that their bodies were not their own and not safe to be in. They were so enchanted they had forgotten the old ways. The witchling was born to a particular witch who had been trained in the infant behavioral modification program at the Center of Men. The enchantment was so strong on her and many others so that they joined forces with the men. However, the witchling's mother was part of a secret coven within the Center of Men, a secret coven of witches who had awoken from the enchantment. They were aware of the threat to witches from the ways of men, and whilst they played along with the ways of men, they also protected their own young. They had created an antidote to the enchantment with a magic spell that neutralized it. The spell was a song, and so they sang it to the witchlings, embedding it into their mind. Sleep now, little one, close your eyes. Do not heed the distant cries. Rest where warm and gentle lies. Leave the waking to the wise. So in order to protect the witchling, her witch mother had to be sure the witchling knew nothing of the enchantment or the antidote. So she taught her witchling to ignore her body's needs and desires, to override her natural abilities and harden. So she would behave like everyone else who was enchanted so as not to give away any clues of her lack of enchantment. The secret coven called this the de-witching program, the way they figured out to protect their witchlings, even without the enchantment, so they would not be noticed. The de-witching process was very hard for the witchling. It was painful, scary. She felt abandoned and betrayed by her mother. Sadly, these tactics were considered necessary, an important safe practice to preserve the witch line. And on one dark and scary night, the ways of men discovered the witches' plan, and the witches were quickly overcome by a new enchantment. enchantment from the ways of men. And so they forgot what they were doing to their children. This became the way, and everyone was following the ways of men and growing their witchlings to forget. They were so enchanted they forgot their plan, and the ways of men continued to overshadow everything. But the witches never knew. The witchling grew to her age at the start of her blood power, and even though the enchantment was strong and such events like a girl's first blood were ignored and discredited and used to disempower them, the witchling's mother and her grandmothers were with her. Something special happened, and there was a transference of knowledge and power, but it was hidden and covered up as a fancy and without any seeming importance. As the seasons went around, the witchling became a fledgling witch, and then she too became swept up in the ways of men without even knowing that's what she was doing. However, after many years of her own training in the ways of men, she started to see through the enchantment, the veil that cloaked the ways of women and witches, the veil that held the power of the witches contained and controlled. Because sometimes when women used their power, it burst through the enchantment. It was getting too hard for the veil to hide the light of the witch power. People saw it in different ways. Some saw flashes of light. Some felt it. Some heard something. People talked about it as something weird, random, and unexplainable. This was happening around their world, especially in the places where witchlings were born. And one day, in her advanced training in control of childbirth in the ways of men, during a teaching session on forced birth, the witch saw a flash of light, a glimpse of the veil shifting, and she noticed the pain in the woman's eyes before the woman pulled herself together and smiled, before the woman smiled her grateful smile to the people controlling her body, as she'd been taught to smile. At that moment, the witch focused on the crack in the veil where the light shone through, and she saw through it to see that the veil was the enchantment, an enchantment of fear and pain and damage and gratitude for it. The enchantment to suppress the women's and witches' power lest they realize and rise up. This was the enchantment on women and witch kind to control them through the ways of men. The witch had learned many practices and techniques to control the power of women and witches, and the de-witching program had trained her in many ways. And what she called on then was her ability to withstand the pain and to pretend to ignore what she was seeing and feeling. Once she noticed that things were not as they seemed, she began to meet other witches who felt the same. And when she found how many they were, she began to speak about what she had seen and heard their similar stories. And so she joined that band of witches who were remembering who they were and doing the healing to recover their bodies and their senses, and she began to do that herself. She became part of this secret group of witches who together pledged to help bring down the veil of the ways of men, the enchanted veil of the ways of men that took the witches' power away, and to help the witches recover and to stop the de-witching process from ever happening again. The end and the beginning. So that's the story of my full moon gathering.